After 10 years of marriage, my husband stood up at our luxurious anniversary dinner and looked me dead in the eye. He did not raise his glass to toast our decade together. Instead, he dropped divorce papers on the table and announced he had been sleeping with my younger sister for 2 years. When she rubbed her belly and fake cried about carrying his child, they expected me to break down. They had no idea I was already 10 steps ahead. My name is Hazel. I am 33 years old, and I work as a forensic accountant for some of the largest corporations in Chicago. My entire career is built on finding hidden truths, tracking stolen assets, and exposing liars who think they are smarter than everyone else. So when the people closest to me tried to pull off the ultimate betrayal, they forgot exactly what I do for a living. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family who completely underestimated your worth. The private dining room at one of Chicago's most exclusive Michelin-starred restaurants was supposed to be a celebration. It was my 10th wedding anniversary with Carter. At 35, Carter was a commercial real estate project manager who loved expensive suits, flashy watches, and the sound of his own voice. He sat beside me, radiating a nervous, almost arrogant energy. Across the table sat my parents, William and Barbara, picking at their gourmet appetizers. Next to them was my 31-year-old sister, Savannah. Savannah was the family golden child, the beautiful, free-spirited owner of a boutique lifestyle brand on Instagram. She sold overpriced candles and aesthetic skincare routines, entirely funded by our parents and her husband. Her husband, Elijah, an incredibly sharp and successful corporate lawyer, was notably absent, having flown to London for an emergency merger acquisition 2 days prior. Elijah is a good man, a hardworking African-American man who loved my sister blindly and provided her with a life of absolute luxury. He did not deserve what was about to happen, and neither did I. The evening had already started with the usual toxic dynamics. My mother spent the first course fawning over Savannah, praising her latest social media post, while completely ignoring the fact that I had just been promoted to senior partner at my auditing firm. My father chimed in, agreeing that Savannah had a true gift for aesthetics, while complaining that my job talking about spreadsheets and financial crimes was too depressing for dinner conversation. I was used to this. I was the boring, workaholic daughter. Savannah was the star. Then the main course was cleared away, and Carter tapped his crystal champagne flute with a silver fork. The delicate ringing sound cut through the low hum of classical music playing in the background. My parents immediately stopped talking, their faces lighting up with anticipation. I watched Carter stand up and adjust his custom Italian suit jacket. I assumed he was going to give a speech about our decade together, about the home we built, or the future we planned. Instead, he reached into his leather briefcase resting on the floor. He did not pull out a gift. He pulled out a thick manila envelope and tossed it onto the pristine white tablecloth. It landed right next to my plate with a heavy thud. Hazel, Carter said, his voice completely devoid of warmth. I am not doing this anymore. I want a divorce. The silence in the private room was absolute. My mother gasped softly, but it did not sound like genuine shock. It sounded rehearsed. I looked down at the envelope, then up at the man I had shared my life with for 10 years. Before I could process the legal documents sitting next to my wine glass, Carter reached across the table. He took Savannah by the hand. He held my sister's hand right in front of me, his fingers intertwining with hers, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. He stood there with his chest puffed out, a man convinced he had won some imaginary prize. Savannah and I are in love, Carter announced, his chin raised in defiance. We have been together for 2 years. Real love. Not the cold, sterile roommate situation you and I have, Hazel. Savannah makes me feel alive. Savannah let out a perfectly timed, trembling sob. She dabbed at her dry eyes with a linen napkin, looking at our parents for validation rather than at me. She wore a smug, subtle smile beneath her fake tears, a look I had seen 1,000 times when we were children, and she managed to steal my favorite toys. I am so sorry, Hazel Savannah whispered, though her tone lacked even a fraction of genuine remorse. We tried to fight it, we really did. But we are soulmates. And well, we cannot hide it anymore. She paused for dramatic effect, moving her free hand to rest gently on her flat stomach. I am pregnant, Hazel. I am carrying Carter baby. 2 years. A pregnancy. My husband and my sister. To a normal person, this would be the moment the world collapses. This would be the moment of screaming, throwing wine, flipping tables, and weeping uncontrollably. But I am not a normal person. I am a forensic accountant. My brain does not process betrayal through immediate grief. It processes it through data. My mind instantly cataloged the last 24 months. The late nights, Carter claimed he was stuck at the real estate firm, finalizing zoning permits. The sudden influx of designer handbags Savannah showed off on her social media, which her small candle business definitely could not afford. The times Elijah mentioned how much his wife was traveling for brand inspiration. The numbers clicked into place like a perfectly balanced ledger. It all made sense. The missing time, the unaccounted expenses, the shifting behaviors. I noticed my father did not stand up to punch his son-in-law. My mother did not yell at her youngest daughter for destroying my marriage. They just watched me waiting for my collapse. I sat completely still. I did not shed a single tear. My hands rested calmly in my lap, and my heart rate remained entirely steady. I looked at Carter, who was bracing himself for a hysterical outburst, and then at Savannah, who was desperately waiting for me to play the role of the shattered, jealous older sister so she could play the tragic heroine. I gave them nothing. I simply stared at them with the cold, calculating precision of an auditor finding a fatal discrepancy in a financial report. They expected a victim. They had no idea they had just handed a loaded gun to an executioner. I shifted my gaze away from the man who had just dismantled our vows and looked directly at the people who had given me life. In any other family, a father would have dragged the cheating husband out of the restaurant by his expensive lapels. A mother would have thrown her glass of ice water in the face of the mistress. I waited for the outrage. I waited for the protective instinct that parents are supposed to possess. The private dining room was suffocatingly quiet, save for the soft clinking of silverware from the main dining floor outside our mahogany doors. A waiter approached with our dessert course, took one look at the frozen tableau at our table, and discreetly backed out of the room, leaving us to our toxicity. Instead, my mother Barbara let out a soft, heavy sigh. She did not reach across the table to comfort me. She reached out and gently placed her manicured hand over Savannah's. She stroked my sister's fingers with a soothing rhythm, as if Savannah were the victim who had just suffered a terrible shock. My mother looked at me with an expression of mild inconvenience. Hazel, you have to understand, Barbara said, her voice carrying that smooth, patronizing tone I had heard my entire life. Savannah has loved Carter since college. You know how she is when her heart is set on something. She just feels things more deeply than you do. I stared at her, letting the absolute absurdity of her words hang in the air. Let us be honest, Hazel, my mother continued, leaning forward, as if explaining a simple math problem to a child. You are always so dry. You are a relentless workaholic. You spend your weekends buried in fraud investigations and corporate tax returns. A man like Carter needs warmth. He needs attention. Now that Savannah is accidentally pregnant, the situation has changed entirely. You need to do the right thing and step aside. Just sign the papers and let your sister have him. The demand was so staggering that it almost felt scripted. But it was not. This was just the reality of being the scapegoat in a family that worshipped their golden child. You are telling me to hand over my husband of 10 years because my sister wants him? I asked, my voice perfectly level. You have always been the strong one, my mother rationalized, waving her hand dismissively. You gave up your college savings when Savannah needed capital to start her lifestyle brand. You let her take the master suite at the lake house because she needed the natural light for her social media photos. Savannah has a fragile heart. You know she struggles with anxiety. You always adapt. This is no different. You can survive on your own. You have your spreadsheets and your corporate clients. Savannah is delicate. She needs a provider. She has a baby on the way now. My father William cleared his throat. He adjusted his silk tie, refusing to meet my eyes directly. He was a man who cared about exactly two things: his membership at the country club and his public image. He poured himself another glass of expensive red wine, acting as though we were discussing a minor business transaction, rather than the destruction of my marriage. "Your mother is right, Hazel," my father said in his booming, authoritative voice. "Do not make a fuss about this. We are a respected family in Chicago. We cannot have a public scandal ruining our reputation." I looked at the man who was supposed to protect me. "Your daughter just announced she has been sleeping with her sister's husband for 2 years," I said flatly. "And your biggest concern is a scandal." My father slammed his hand flat against the table, making the crystal glasses rattle. "Yes, exactly," he snapped. "Do you have any idea what will happen if Elijah finds out about this? Elijah is a ruthless corporate lawyer. He is one of the most powerful attorneys in the city. If he discovers Savannah has been sleeping with Carter, he will destroy her in divorce court. He will cut off her credit cards and drag this family name through the mud. A scandal like this would ruin her brand. Her followers look up to her perfect life with Elijah. We have to manage this transition smoothly so she does not lose everything." The twisted logic was breathtaking. They were not angry that Savannah had destroyed my marriage. They were terrified that Elijah, the wealthy African-American lawyer who funded Savannah's lavish lifestyle, would find out he was being betrayed. They wanted me to fall on my sword to protect Savannah's financial security until she could safely transition to Carter. They wanted Elijah to keep paying the bills until Carter was ready to take over the financial burden. "You will sign the papers." Carter prepared, my father commanded, pointing a thick finger at me. "You will move out of the house. You will keep this completely quiet. If anyone asks, you will simply say you and Carter grew apart because of your demanding career. You will not drag your sister down just because you failed to keep your husband happy." I watched the three of them form a united front against me, a united front of narcissism and delusion. They had spent my entire life taking pieces of me to build Savannah up. My time, my money, my opportunities. Now they wanted to take my marriage. Carter sat back in his chair looking incredibly pleased with himself. He actually smirked. He had played his cards knowing exactly how my toxic parents would react. He knew they would shield Savannah from any consequences. He knew they would demand I take the blame. They wanted me to pack my bags, disappear into the shadows, and let them play out their perfect blended family fantasy. They expected me to not apologize for being a bad wife and quietly exit the stage. I looked at the divorce papers sitting on the table. Then I looked at Savannah, who was still rubbing her stomach with that pathetic manufactured innocence. Then I looked at my parents, who were staring at me with cold, expectant eyes. They really thought I was the same obedient girl who used to sacrifice her own happiness just to keep the peace. They thought my silence meant submission. They thought because I did not scream, I was surrendering. They forgot that I am a forensic accountant. I do not scream. I do not throw tantrums. I collect evidence. I build cases. I dismantle my targets brick by brick until they have absolutely nothing left. Carter aggressively pulled back his chair, the legs scraping loudly against the polished hardwood floor of the private dining room. He adjusted his cuffs and looked down at me with an expression of supreme boredom. He was entirely finished playing the part of my husband. Now he was just a man eager to start his new life with his shiny new prize. "Come on, Savannah," Carter said, his voice oozing with a sickeningly sweet protective tone he had never once used with me. "We need to leave. The doctor is waiting for us at the premium prenatal clinic, and I do not want to keep him waiting. Our baby deserves the absolute best care." Savannah practically bounded out of her chair, holding her perfectly flat stomach, as if she were protecting a delicate treasure. My mother Barbara beamed at the sight, rushing to hand Savannah her designer cashmere coat. My father William gave Carter a firm nod of approval, entirely dismissing my presence. Carter reached into his tailored jacket and pulled out his leather wallet. He slid out our joint platinum credit card and tossed it onto the table. The plastic clattered against the fine china landing right next to my untouched wine glass. "You handle the bill," Hazel Carter ordered, his tone dripping with condescension. "Consider it a final parting gift from me. After all, I know you do not make enough at your boring little desk job to cover a dinner like this. Take care of the check, and then pack your things before I get home tonight." I looked down at the joint card. I did not say a word. A few seconds later, the waiter entered our private room, carrying a sleek black leather folio. He approached me with a polite bow and presented the bill. I glanced at the bottom line, $4,000 exactly. My father and Carter had ordered 3 bottles of vintage Bordeaux to celebrate Savannah's expanding brand earlier in the evening, and the imported caviar had certainly added up. I picked up the joint card Carter had thrown at me and placed it on the silver tray. The waiter smiled and walked over to the portable payment terminal resting on a side table. He swiped the card. A sharp negative beep echoed through the silent room. The waiter frowned and swiped it again. Another harsh beep. "I am terribly sorry, sir," the waiter said, turning to Carter with an apologetic expression. "The card has been declined." Carter froze. His arrogant smirk instantly vanished. My father stopped midway through putting on his coat, turning around with a deep scowl. "What do you mean declined?" Carter snapped, snatching the card from the waiter. "Run it again. There is a $50,000 limit on that account." "I already ran it twice, sir." The waiter maintained his professional composure. "The system says the account is frozen due to suspicious activity and insufficient funds." Carter turned his furious gaze toward me. His face flushed a dark, angry red. "What did you do, Hazel?" he demanded, slamming his hands on the table. I sat perfectly still. I did not blink. I had set up financial alerts on all our accounts 3 months ago. The moment I noticed massive, unexplainable withdrawals, I initiated a forensic lockdown on every single shared asset. The bank flagged the account for severe fraud the second Carter tried to move more money this morning. He was completely locked out of the funds he thought he controlled. Carter aggressively dug into his wallet and pulled out his personal business credit card. Here he practically shoved it into the waiter's chest. "Use this one, and bring me the receipt immediately. I do not have time for this incompetence." The waiter took the new card and inserted it into the terminal. The machine processed for 3 seconds before issuing the exact same loud negative beep. "Declined, sir," the waiter announced, his voice dropping an octave. Carter looked as if he had been physically struck. My mother gasped, clutching her pearl necklace. My father, William, glared at Carter, his patience evaporating. "Carter, what is the meaning of this?" my father demanded. "You cannot even pay for a celebratory dinner." Carter was humiliated, his fragile ego shattered in front of the very people he was trying to impress. And because he was a coward, he immediately directed all his explosive rage at me. "This is your fault, you vindictive wretch," Carter yelled, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You are nothing but a lowly accountant, a pathetic, boring bean counter who clings to my coattails. You have lived off my real estate commissions for 10 years. You have zero ambition. You are just a jealous, bitter woman trying to sabotage me because you cannot keep a real man satisfied. You are worthless, Hazel." His insults bounced off me like rain on concrete. He was projecting his own financial ruin onto me. He truly believed he was the primary breadwinner. He truly believed my job as a forensic accountant was just pushing papers for a meager salary. He had never bothered to ask about my promotions, my equity shares, or my client roster. I did not argue with him. I did not raise my voice to defend my honor. I simply opened my designer clutch and reached inside. I bypassed my standard cards and pulled out a heavy, solid titanium card. The Centurion Black Card. It is an invitation-only card reserved for the top 1% of high-net-worth individuals. It requires a massive annual spending minimum and an initiation fee that costs more than Carter's luxury car. He had never seen it before because I kept my actual wealth entirely separated from his reckless spending. I placed the heavy black metal onto the silver tray. The solid clink of the titanium hitting the metal tray echoed loudly in the room. Carter's eyes darted to the card. His jaw went slack. He recognized the sleek design instantly. His real estate clients often bragged about having one, but he had never qualified for it himself. The waiter took the black card with wide eyes. He tapped it against the terminal. A soft, pleasant chime filled the air. Approved instantly. Where did you get that? Carter stammered, his voice suddenly hollow and weak. How do you have that card? I signed the receipt, leaving a generous tip for the waiter. I picked up my clutch and stood up from the table, smoothing the invisible wrinkles from my tailored dress. I looked at Carter, whose face was now pale with a sickening realization. I looked at Savannah, who was staring at the black card as if she had just seen a ghost. I looked at my parents, who were completely paralyzed by the sheer display of silent, overwhelming power. I did not answer Carter's question. I did not owe a thief and a liar any explanations about my financial dominance. I stepped away from the table, leaving the signed receipt next to Carter's useless, declined plastic cards. I turned my back on all four of them and walked out of the private dining room, the heavy mahogany doors closing softly behind me. I left them standing there, utterly speechless, suffocating in their own humiliation. The drive home was a silent glide through the illuminated streets of Chicago. I parked my car in the garage of the townhouse I had purchased entirely with my own corporate bonuses 5 years ago. Carter always liked to pretend we bought it together, but my name was the only one on the deed. I walked inside, shedding my tailored coat, and tossed my keys onto the entryway console. The house was perfectly quiet. There were no tears burning my eyes. There was no urge to smash framed wedding photos or scream into a pillow. Grief is a luxury for people who do not have a war to win. I had a war to win, and my battlefield was made of digital ledgers and offshore routing numbers. I walked straight into my home office and locked the door. I poured myself a single glass of cold water, set it on my desk, and woke up my custom-built workstation. 3 high-definition monitors flickered to life, casting a harsh blue glow across the dark room. It was time to go to work. Carter thought he was a mastermind. As a commercial real estate project manager, he dealt with massive budgets and complex contracts every day. He naturally assumed that gave him the upper hand in financial literacy. He completely forgot that I audit executives twice his caliber for a living. I track missing billions for international conglomerates. His clumsy attempts to hide marital assets were like a toddler trying to finger paint over a masterpiece. I logged into our secure financial portal using the administrative backdoor I had established months ago. I had been monitoring his erratic spending for a while, but tonight I needed the exact coordinates of his most recent theft. Earlier today, the bank had flagged his attempt to move a massive sum of money, which triggered the freeze I had weaponized at the restaurant. Now I needed to see exactly where the initial hemorrhage had gone. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, pulling up the joint savings account. The balance glared back at me in stark red numbers. He had drained exactly $150,000 just 48 hours ago. This was money we had supposedly earmarked for a future investment property. Instead, he had wired it out in 3 separate, highly calculated transactions to avoid immediate daily reporting limits. I traced the wire transfers. They did not go to a standard checking account. Carter had funneled the money into a newly registered limited liability company. I ran a quick search on the State Registry of Corporations. The LLC was created just 2 weeks ago. The registered agent was a cheap online legal service, but a forensic accountant knows exactly how to peel back those corporate veils. I ran a cross-reference on the tax identification number and the associated mailing address. The address led directly to a luxury real estate brokerage firm. I hacked my way through public property records and pending title transfers in the county database. It took me less than 20 minutes to find the exact match. Carter had used our $150,000 as a cash down payment on a sprawling hidden mansion in a highly exclusive suburban gated community. I pulled up the pending deed of trust. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and took a slow sip of water. The buyer listed on the official property deed was not the LLC. The LLC was merely the vehicle to transfer the stolen funds. The final legal owner of the multi-million-dollar love nest was listed in plain black and white text. Savannah. He had stolen my money to buy my sister a mansion. Just as the sheer audacity of his crime settled over me, my cell phone began to vibrate violently on the desk. The screen lit up with a barrage of text messages from Carter. He was undoubtedly standing outside the Michelin-starred restaurant, furious, humiliated, and entirely broke. I picked up the phone and read the incoming threats. "You think you are so smart locking my cards? You humiliated me in front of your parents. I am calling my lawyers tomorrow morning. I am taking half of everything we own. Have your bags packed, Hazel. I am forcing the sale of the house. I want my equity." He was demanding half of a house he did not own, using the threat of lawyers he could no longer afford. I did not type a single letter in response. Replying to a narcissist only gives them the oxygen they crave. Instead, I took screenshots of every single threat, every demand, and every insult. I uploaded the images directly to a secure encrypted cloud folder labeled Divorce Evidence. He was busy throwing a digital temper tantrum while I was actively assembling a federal fraud case against him. I placed the phone face down on the desk and looked at the clock on my computer monitor. It was approaching midnight in Chicago. That meant it was nearly 6 in the morning in London. Elijah was a man of extreme discipline. As a high-powered corporate attorney navigating international mergers, he woke up at 5 every morning to review contracts and hit the hotel gym before his boardroom meetings. I knew he would be awake. I knew his mind would be sharp. I picked up my phone again and bypassed my messages, opening my international calling application. I scrolled down to Elijah's contact and pressed dial. The line rang exactly twice before the connection clicked open. Hazel. Elijah answered, his voice crisp, deep, and entirely alert. "It is past midnight in Chicago. Are you all right?" I appreciated his immediate situational awareness. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He knew a phone call at this hour meant an anomaly in the system. "I am perfectly fine, Elijah," I replied, my tone matching his professional cadence. "But I need you to listen to me very carefully. You need to book the next available first-class flight out of Heathrow and return to Chicago immediately." The line was silent for a fraction of a second. I could hear the faint sound of traffic from the London streets in the background. When Elijah spoke again, his lawyer instincts had fully engaged. "Give me the summary, Hazel," he demanded, his voice dropping into a dangerous, serious register. "Your wife and my husband have been having an affair for the past 2 years," I stated, delivering the facts without a single ounce of emotional fragility. "Carter just announced it at our anniversary dinner. Savannah is claiming she is pregnant with his child." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Elijah was a formidable man, a brilliant African-American attorney who had fought tooth and nail to reach the top of the corporate legal ladder. He provided Savannah with a life of absolute privilege, and she had repaid him with the ultimate betrayal. Before Elijah could process the emotional blow, I delivered the financial kill shot. "That is not the only reason you need to come home." "Elijah?" I continued, pulling up the wire transfer receipts on my screen. "Carter just drained $150,000 of my money. He funneled it through a shell company to put a down payment on a luxury mansion. The deed is in Savannah's name. They are using stolen funds to build their new life. I need my favorite corporate lawyer to help me burn them to the ground." The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and terrifying. Then Elijah spoke, and his voice sent a shiver of pure adrenaline down my spine. "I am booking my flight right now, Hazel. Do not make a single move until I land. We are going to destroy them both." The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my kitchen. I stood at the marble island, holding a cup of black coffee, perfectly composed. I had not slept a single minute. Instead, I had spent the entire night compiling digital dossiers, building an airtight financial profile on my soon-to-be ex-husband. My phone had remained silent since my call with Elijah. It was the calm before the inevitable storm. That storm arrived exactly at 8 in the morning with a violent pounding on my front door. It was not a polite knock. It was the aggressive, entitled hammering of people who believed they owned everything they touched. I set my coffee mug down. I walked to the entryway and pulled open the heavy wooden door. My parents, William and Barbara, pushed their way inside before I could even utter a greeting. They did not look like parents who had just watched their eldest daughter suffer a devastating betrayal. They looked like cornered animals. My father's face was flushed, and his usually immaculate golf shirt was wrinkled. My mother clutched her designer handbag so tightly her knuckles were white. William marched straight into my kitchen and slapped a thick legal document down on the pristine marble counter. It was a quitclaim deed, a legally binding contract designed to transfer property ownership from one party to another rapidly and without a traditional sale. I looked at the bold black letters printed at the top of the page and then slowly raised my eyes to meet my father's furious gaze. "Sign it, Hazel!" My father commanded, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You are going to sign this house over to Savannah and Carter today. We already had the family attorney draft the paperwork. All it needs is your signature and a notary." My mother stepped forward, attempting to soften the blow with her usual manipulative tone. "Be reasonable, Hazel," she pleaded. "Your sister is pregnant. She needs a stable, stress-free environment to nurture the baby. Carter is dealing with a lot of financial transitions right now, and this house is the perfect place for them to start their new family. You have your high-paying corporate job. You can easily rent a nice apartment downtown closer to your office. It just makes sense." I stared at the two of them, letting the sheer audacity of their demand wash over me. "You want me to sign away a house that I bought entirely with my own money?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. "You want me to hand over my home to the man who cheated on me and the sister who betrayed me, just so they can have a comfortable maternity nest?" William slammed his fist on the counter. "Do not play the victim with me, Hazel. This is not about your hurt feelings. This is about saving this family from financial ruin." I raised an eyebrow. Financial ruin. That was an interesting choice of words. "Carter makes a fortune in commercial real estate," I stated, testing the waters. "Savannah has her thriving lifestyle brand. Why would they need my house to avoid financial ruin?" My father's face turned a darker shade of red. The veins in his neck bulged as he lost whatever shred of composure he had left. "Her company is drowning in debt, Hazel. Savannah's lifestyle brand has been bleeding money for 3 years. The suppliers stopped shipping. The creditors were threatening to seize everything. I had to take out a second mortgage on our family home just to bail her out and keep her out of bankruptcy court." The truth finally spilled out, ugly and desperate. My parents had risked their own financial security to fund Savannah's fake Instagram reality, and now the bill had come due. "Carter made me a deal," my father shouted, his desperation laid bare. "Carter promised me that if you sign this house over to him, he will use his real estate connections to liquidate it quietly. He will use the equity from your house to pay off the second mortgage I took out for Savannah. If you do not sign this, Hazel, the bank will foreclose on our home. You have to do this for us. You owe this family." I looked at my mother, who was nodding frantically, tears welling in her eyes. "Please, Hazel," Barbara begged. "We will lose everything if you do not cooperate. Carter is our only way out." I picked up the quitclaim deed from the marble counter. I held the crisp white paper in my hands, feeling the weight of their lifelong manipulation. They had always treated me as a resource, an emergency fund, a safety net to catch Savannah whenever she fell. And now they were literally asking me to sacrifice my home to pay for her failures. I looked my father dead in the eye. I gripped the top of the document and ripped it in half. The sound of tearing paper was louder than a gunshot in the silent kitchen. My mother screamed. My father lunged forward but stopped when I raised my hand. "Carter is lying to you," I said, my voice cold and absolute. "Carter does not have a plan to save your house. Carter just stole $150,000 from me to buy a hidden mansion for Savannah. He is entirely broke. He wants this house because his own bank accounts are currently frozen by a federal fraud alert that I initiated last night. He is using you just like Savannah has used you her entire life. William stared at me, his mouth opening and closing in shock. I pointed toward the front door. "Get out of my house," I commanded. "You are not my parents. You are parasites. If you ever step foot on my property again, I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. This is my home. You will never take a single dime from me again. Get out." They backed away, terrified by the absolute lack of mercy in my eyes. They scrambled out the front door, leaving me alone to prepare for the real war. The rain in Chicago had just started to freeze against the pavement when I walked into the subterranean jazz lounge. It was a discreet establishment tucked beneath the financial district, illuminated only by amber wall sconces and the low burn of expensive bourbon. This was not a place for casual meetings. It was a place where executives buried their mistakes. I sat at a corner booth facing the door, my laptop resting inside my leather tote. I did not have to wait long. Exactly 14 hours after our brief phone call, the heavy oak door swung open. Elijah stepped inside. He had come straight from international arrivals at O'Hare International Airport. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that somehow lacked a single wrinkle despite the transatlantic flight. He carried his signature monogrammed leather briefcase. As an African-American corporate attorney who regularly dismantled multinational mergers before breakfast, Elijah possessed an aura that demanded absolute compliance. He did not look like a man whose wife had just announced she was pregnant with his brother-in-law. He looked like an apex predator who had just caught the scent of blood. He slid into the leather booth opposite me. He did not offer a tired smile. He did not sigh. He signaled the bartender with a subtle raise of 2 fingers, ordering a Scotch neat. "Are you holding together, Hazel?" He asked, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that carried no trace of emotional fragility. "I am calculating," I replied evenly. "I assume you are doing the same." Elijah unclasped the brass locks on his briefcase. The sound was incredibly loud in the quiet booth. I did not ask about the flight. He did not ask how I felt when Carter threw the divorce papers on the table. We were 2 highly analytical professionals operating in our natural element. The bartender delivered his drink. Elijah took 1 slow, measured sip before setting the heavy crystal glass down. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder, placing it squarely between us. "You told me Carter used $150,000 of your money to put a down payment on a house for Savannah," he stated, locking his dark, piercing eyes onto mine. "You said the deed was registered to a shell company." I nodded, pulling my own printed dossier from my tote bag and sliding it across the table to him. "Here are the routing numbers, the wire transfer receipts, and the registered property deed. Savannah is the sole owner of record. My parents came to my house this morning trying to force me to sign over my primary residence to cover the tracks. They claimed Savannah's lifestyle brand is bankrupt, and my father took out a second mortgage to save her from creditors." Elijah scanned the documents with terrifying speed. A cold, humorless smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Her company is not bankrupt, Hazel. It has been functionally insolvent for 16 months. I stopped injecting capital into her vanity project last year when I realized she was using the business accounts to fund luxury hotel stays. She claimed she was scouting aesthetic locations for product shoots." He pushed my documents aside and opened his own folder. He spread a series of high-wealth bank statements across the dark polished wood of our table. "I knew Savannah was vain," Elijah said, his voice dropping an octave, chilling the air around us. "I knew she was selfish. I accepted her flaws because I believed she was grieving. I gave her endless grace because of what happened 3 years ago." My chest tightened. 3 years ago, Savannah and Elijah had lost their first child, a boy who passed away just hours after birth due to a severe congenital heart defect. It was the only time I had ever seen Savannah truly devastated. Elijah had been a ghost of a man for months. To honor their son, Elijah had established a private memorial trust fund intended to eventually build a pediatric cardiology wing at the local children's hospital. Look at the highlighted transactions, Hazel, he commanded, pushing a specific bank statement toward me. I looked down at the paper. As a forensic accountant, I can read a financial statement the way a musician reads sheet music. I traced the flow of capital. The account listed was the Memorial Trust Fund. Several massive withdrawals had been executed over the past 8 months. The funds were routed through Savannah's personal business account, disguised as vendor payments, and then immediately transferred out. I followed the paper trail to the final vendor receipt. My blood ran completely cold. It was a receipt from an elite Swiss watchmaker. The purchase was a custom platinum Rolex timepiece, the exact same platinum Rolex that Carter had been flaunting at family dinners for the past 6 months. Carter had claimed it was a bonus from his real estate firm. She raided our dead son's memorial fund to buy her lover a watch, Elijah stated. Every word he spoke felt like a heavy stone dropping into a dark well. She forged my authorization signature on the trust distributions. She stole from the memory of our child to impress your husband. I looked up from the paper, meeting Elijah's gaze. The sheer depravity of the act defied human logic. Savannah had always been spoiled and entitled, but this was a descent into absolute sociopathy. Carter wearing a watch funded by a dead infant's memorial trust while sitting at my anniversary dinner and holding my sister's hand. Elijah did not shed a tear. His grief had instantly crystallized into a weapon of mass destruction. They think they are dealing with a heartbroken husband and a discarded wife, Elijah said, leaning forward, his broad shoulders completely blocking out the ambient light of the bar. They think we are going to fight them in a standard family court. They think we are going to argue over alimony and property division while they play the happy expecting couple. I tapped my fingernail against the Rolex receipt. Carter wants to force the sale of my house because his accounts are currently frozen by a federal fraud alert. He thinks he can bully me into submission before the bank officially audits his transactions. Elijah finished his scotch in one smooth motion. Then we do not give them family court, Hazel. We give them federal court. I am going to draft a civil lawsuit for severe financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and grand larceny. I will personally ensure Savannah faces criminal charges for wire fraud and forging signatures on a protected trust. And I will tear Carter's professional life apart, I replied, seamlessly matching his lethal momentum. He is a senior manager at his firm. If he is funneling stolen money through shell companies, I guarantee he has embezzled from his commercial real estate clients. I am going to audit his entire corporate existence. I will hand his board of directors a complete dossier of his financial crimes. We sat there in the dim light of the underground lounge, a perfect alliance forged in the fires of ultimate betrayal. There was no need for comforting hugs or sympathetic platitudes. We were two highly analytical, exceptionally ruthless professionals who had been pushed entirely too far. Savannah and Carter wanted a new life together. We were going to make absolutely certain they started that new life behind bars. Elijah closed his briefcase, snapping the brass locks shut with a sharp, definitive click. "Let the hunt begin," he said. The digital execution began at exactly 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was sitting at my home office desk finalizing the forensic blueprint of Carter's embezzlement when my secure work phone began to vibrate off the polished wood surface. It was not a steady ring. It was a relentless, continuous spasm of notifications. I unlocked the screen and watched a tidal wave of alerts flood my display. Direct messages, missed calls, email warnings, and an endless stream of social media tags. My sister had launched her offensive. Savannah possessed an Instagram following of 500,000 people who eagerly consumed her curated lifestyle content. She sold them an illusion of organic wellness and effortless grace. Today, she was selling them a tragedy. I opened the application and found her latest post already sitting at 250,000 views. The video was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Savannah sat on a plush cream-colored sofa bathed in soft morning light. She wore an oversized knit sweater that swallowed her small frame, making her look fragile and defenseless. Her perfectly styled hair was slightly messy to convey authentic distress. There was no makeup on her face save for a subtle redness around her eyes. She looked directly into the camera lens and let a single perfect tear roll down her cheek. "I need to speak my truth," Savannah whispered into the microphone, her voice trembling with manufactured bravery. "For years, I have watched someone I love be systematically destroyed by emotional abuse. I have watched my sister Hazel break a good man down until there was nothing left but a shell." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, analyzing her performance. She did not mention Elijah. She completely omitted the fact that she was a married woman cheating on her own devoted husband who financed her entire existence. Instead, she painted a horrifying portrait of me. She described me as a cold, calculating tyrant who treated my marriage like a corporate dictatorship. She claimed I restricted Carter's finances, tracked his every move, and punished him for showing any emotion. When Carter came to me for a shoulder to cry on, we just wanted to survive. Savannah continued, clasping her hands over her heart. We were two broken people finding solace in each other. It was not an affair, it was a rescue. We saved each other from a life of absolute misery. And now that we are expecting a miracle baby, Hazel is using her corporate power to freeze our accounts and leave us homeless. She finished the video by begging her followers for prayers and support, asking them to send positive energy to her new family. She never explicitly told her followers to attack me. She did not have to. She knew exactly how mob mentality worked on the internet. She had weaponized her audience, pointing them directly at my life like a loaded weapon. The fallout was instantaneous and utterly vicious. The comment section was a war zone of misplaced righteous indignation. Thousands of strangers who knew absolutely nothing about my life were calling me a monster, a narcissist, and a corporate psychopath. They called for my utter destruction. They praised Savannah for her bravery and lauded Carter as a survivor of domestic abuse. Within an hour, the digital mob escalated their tactics. Someone leaked my professional profiles. Then they found my employer. My firm is one of the most prestigious forensic accounting and audit partnerships in the country. We deal with international tax law and corporate fraud. Reputation is the absolute currency of our business. Savannah's followers descended upon our company pages like a swarm of locusts. They began review bombing the firm across every major platform. Hundreds of one-star reviews flooded in within minutes. "Do not trust this firm. They employ Hazel, a known domestic abuser," read one furious review. "Hazel uses her accounting skills to financially ruin innocent people. Fire her immediately, or we will boycott your clients," read another. The firm's switchboard was jammed with angry callers demanding my immediate termination. My managing partner, a ruthless corporate veteran, sent me a single urgent email requiring my presence in a crisis management meeting the following morning. Savannah was not just trying to ruin my reputation. She was actively trying to incinerate my career. She wanted to strip away the only thing she thought gave me power, so I would be forced to submit. Right on cue, my personal cell phone lit up with an encrypted text message. It was Carter. He was capitalizing on the chaos they had just manufactured. "Look at the mess you made, Hazel," the message read. "Savannah's followers are tearing your company apart. Your firm is going to fire you by the end of the week. You are going to lose your precious career and your license. But I can make it stop. Sign the quitclaim deed, hand over the house, and release the frozen funds. Give us what we want, and Savannah will post a follow-up video telling her fans to back off. Refuse and your career is permanently finished." It was a textbook extortion attempt delivered in writing across a cellular network. Carter was a fool. He had just handed a forensic accountant prosecuting a fraud case a documented threat of blackmail. He actually believed that public shaming would force a woman who dismantles corporate criminals for a living to surrender her assets. I did not panic. I did not cry over the hateful comments from thousands of strangers. I did not fear for my job. A lesser professional might have folded under the immense pressure of a viral hate campaign. They might have signed away their hard-earned property just to make the screaming internet stop. But I understood the mechanics of absolute power. Savannah's followers were a digital illusion. My evidence was a legal reality. I took high-resolution screenshots of Carter's extortion demands. I archived every single one of Savannah's defamatory claims, preserving the videos before she could delete them. I documented the timestamps, the view counts, and the specific violent threats directed at my firm. They thought they were burying me under a mountain of public shame. They did not realize they were just handing me the exact ammunition I needed to upgrade my civil lawsuit into a federal case for extortion and corporate sabotage. I picked up my secure phone and dialed my managing partner. I did not offer an apology for the digital noise. I simply informed him that the firm was currently experiencing a coordinated cyber attack orchestrated by an embezzler I was personally investigating. I told him to have our corporate legal team and our public relations crisis unit standing by. Savannah wanted to play the victim on a public stage. Carter wanted to use extortion to steal my house. I smiled a cold, lethal smile in the silence of my office. They had chosen their weapons and drawn their battle lines. Tomorrow, I would show them mine. The corporate headquarters of my firm occupied the top 3 floors of a towering glass skyscraper in downtown Chicago. It was a sanctuary of absolute order, governed by strict access controls and elite professionalism. My corner office featured soundproof glass walls that overlooked the sprawling city skyline. It was an environment designed to intimidate white-collar criminals during audits. I was at my desk reviewing the digital footprint of the cyber attack when the heavy glass door to my office swung open with violent force. Carter stood in the doorway, breathing heavily. He had bypassed the lobby reception by using his old spouse emergency access protocols, a privilege I had not yet revoked with building management. He wore a custom-tailored navy blue suit and a silk tie that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His hair was perfectly styled, but his eyes were wide with a frantic, manic energy. He marched into my office and slammed the door shut behind him. He did not care that dozens of junior analysts and senior partners could see him through the glass walls. He marched directly to my desk and threw a crumpled document onto my keyboard. It was the same quitclaim deed my parents had tried to force upon me the day before. "Sign it," Hazel Carter demanded, leaning over my desk and planting his hands firmly on the polished mahogany. "Savannah's video is already at 500,000 views. My phone has been blowing up with people telling me how brave I am for escaping your abuse. Your firm is getting shredded online. I know your managing partner called you in for a crisis meeting this morning. You are drowning. Sign the house over to me, unfreeze the bank accounts, and I will have Savannah call off her digital army." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I leaned back in my leather executive chair and looked at the man I had married. He truly believed he had me cornered. He was so blinded by his own narcissism that he could not see he was walking blindly into a federal trap. I reached forward and casually tapped the screen of my smartphone, which was resting face up on my desk. I engaged the voice recording application. The small red light blinked silently, entirely unnoticed by Carter. "You came all the way to my office to threaten my career over a house I purchased with my own money?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I came here to collect what I am owed." Carter scoffed, straightening his posture and adjusting his expensive tie. "Do you really think I need your pathetic little accounting salary, Hazel? Do you think I actually need your money to survive? I am doing you a favor by offering you a way out of this public relations nightmare." I raised an eyebrow, inviting him to continue. "If you do not need my money, Carter, why are you throwing a temper tantrum in my office over frozen bank accounts?" His face flushed with pure, unadulterated ego. "Because I need the liquidity right now to secure my new life with Savannah," he bragged, his chest puffing out. "But I will not need it for long. I am about to close the biggest commercial real estate deal of my entire career. I am finalizing a $10 million investment package with a massive venture capital fund. The moment I secure their signature, my firm is promoting me to Vice President of Development. I am taking home a $2 million commission, Hazel. $2 million. I am going to be untouchable. I am going to buy Savannah a lifestyle you could only dream of. He was practically vibrating with arrogance. He was so desperate to prove his superiority that he willingly laid out his entire corporate timeline. So let me make sure I understand your terms perfectly, Carter, I said, ensuring my voice was crystal clear for the recording device on my desk. You are explicitly stating that if I do not sign over the deed to my personal property and release the funds you attempted to funnel into a shell company, you will continue to use Savannah's social media platform to orchestrate a targeted harassment campaign against my employer. You are threatening to destroy my professional auditing license unless I surrender my financial assets to you. Is that correct? Carter sneered, leaning down until his face was inches from mine. That is exactly right, Hazel. You are finally starting to understand how the real world works. You are outmatched. I hold all the cards. Sign the paper right now, or I will make sure you are fired by Friday. I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the chilling, calculating smile of an apex predator watching its prey step directly into the snare. I reached forward and tapped my phone screen again, stopping the recording. I saved the audio file directly to my secure cloud server. Thank you, Carter, I said softly. I really appreciate your cooperation. His sneer faltered, his brow furrowed in confusion. What are you talking about? I picked up my desk phone and pressed the speed dial button for building security. Yes, this is Hazel at the corner office on the 40th floor, I said, my voice ringing with total authority. We have a hostile trespasser in my office making active extortion threats. I need an extraction team immediately. Carter stood up straight, his eyes darting around the room. You cannot call security on your own husband. You are not my husband, I corrected him, standing up and smoothing my skirt. You are a common criminal who just delivered a recorded confession of corporate extortion and blackmail. Before Carter could even process the catastrophic mistake he had just made, the heavy glass door of my office swung open. 3 large security guards wearing tactical uniforms marched into the room. They did not ask questions. They recognized my authority as a senior partner and immediately moved to neutralize the threat. Sir, you need to vacate the premises immediately, the lead guard stated, stepping between Carter and my desk. Carter panicked. He puffed out his chest, trying to salvage his pride. Do not touch me. I am an executive. I am a future vice president. You have no idea who you are dealing with. He made the fatal error of shoving the security guard. The physical altercation lasted less than 3 seconds. 2 guards grabbed Carter's arms, twisting them securely behind his back, while the 3rd guard grabbed him by the collar of his custom-tailored suit. Get your hands off me! Carter screamed, his face turning purple with absolute rage and humiliation. Hazel, tell them to let me go. I will ruin you. I will take everything from you. I stood silently behind my desk, watching the spectacle unfold. Outside my glass walls, dozens of my colleagues, junior analysts, senior auditors, and corporate partners had stopped working. They were all standing at their desks, watching Carter thrash and scream like a feral animal. The security team dragged him forcefully out of my office. His expensive leather shoes scrambled uselessly against the carpet as they hauled him down the main corridor. He shouted obscenities, threatening to sue the building, threatening to destroy my firm, threatening everyone in his path. He looked entirely unhinged. He looked exactly like the deranged, abusive partner he and Savannah had falsely accused me of being. The entire corporate floor watched in stunned silence as the so-called successful real estate executive was thrown into the service elevator like a common vagrant. I picked up the crumpled quitclaim deed he had left on my keyboard. I dropped it directly into the shredder, listening to the satisfying mechanical hum as the blades chewed the document into worthless confetti. Carter thought he had walked into my office as a conqueror. He had just been thrown out onto the Chicago streets as a trespasser, and he had handed me the exact audio evidence I needed to put him in a federal prison. The night wrapped around Chicago like a dark velvet shroud. Inside my home office, the ambient temperature felt like a server room. 3 high-definition monitors illuminated the space with streams of raw financial data. Elijah sat across from me in a tailored armchair, perfectly still, his sharp eyes tracking the numbers scrolling across the secondary display. He had shed his suit jacket hours ago, but his posture remained as rigid and commanding as it was in a corporate boardroom. We had spent the last 6 hours cross-referencing the shell corporation Carter had registered. My husband thought he was a financial genius for using an online legal service to mask his identity. But anonymity is an illusion when you are being hunted by a forensic accountant and a top-tier corporate lawyer. Elijah handed me a fresh cup of black coffee. His hand did not shake. We were not grieving spouses. We were an execution squad preparing a lethal injection of federal evidence. Look at the capitalization structure of the LLC, Elijah instructed, pointing a long finger at the middle monitor. You tracked the $150,000 he drained from your joint savings account. You proved he used that exact amount for the initial earnest money deposit on the mansion. But the final closing documents show a cash purchase of $1.2 million. Savannah is listed as the sole owner with 0 mortgage contingencies. Where did Carter get the remaining $1 million to close the deal in cash? That is exactly the anomaly I am chasing, I replied, taking a sip of the bitter coffee. Carter makes a lucrative salary, but he spends it faster than he earns it on custom suits and luxury car leases. He does not have $1 million in liquid capital. He had to pull it from an external source. My fingers danced across the mechanical keyboard. I accessed a specialized public records database used by elite auditing firms to track commercial real estate transactions. I pulled the specific property deed and isolated the title company's final settlement statement. I needed to see the exact routing numbers that wired the remaining balance into the closing account. When the digitized document rendered on my screen, I zoomed in on the wire transfer receipt. I memorized the 9-digit bank routing number and the truncated account identifier. I opened a parallel window and ran a reverse search through a commercial banking directory. The results populated instantly. My breath caught in my throat. The sheer magnitude of Carter's stupidity was breathtaking. Elijah, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. Look at the origin account for the final $1 million wire transfer. Elijah leaned forward, his dark eyes narrowing as he read the screen. He read the name of the banking institution and the specific classification code attached to the account. His jaw tightened. That is an escrow trust account, Elijah stated, the legal implications immediately clicking into place in his brilliant mind. That is a protected commercial account used specifically for holding client funds during massive real estate acquisitions. I nodded, my heart pounding with the cold thrill of an absolute checkmate. It is not just any escrow account, I confirmed. I cross-referenced the corporate identification number attached to the wire. That account belongs to Carter's employer. It is the primary client holding fund for his commercial real estate firm. We sat in stunned silence for 10 seconds. The puzzle pieces violently snapped together, revealing a picture of staggering criminality. Carter was a senior project manager. He had administrative access to incoming client deposits for major commercial developments. He had diverted a massive client deposit meant for a downtown high-rise project directly into his own hidden shell company. He then commingled those stolen corporate funds with the $150,000 he had stolen from me. He used that highly illegal cocktail of embezzled money to buy a suburban mansion outright in Savannah's name. He did not just steal from his wife, Elijah, said, his voice vibrating with lethal realization. He stole $1 million from his own corporate clients. He breached his fiduciary duty. He committed egregious wire fraud across state lines. He engaged in money laundering by commingling stolen marital assets with embezzled corporate funds to purchase real property. He needed a major cash injection to buy Savannah her dream house, I explained, tracing the timeline on my digital notepad. He thought he could borrow the money from his firm's escrow account, close the deal on the mansion, and then replace the stolen client funds when his highly anticipated $10 million venture capital project finalized next week. He was banking on his massive upcoming commission to cover his tracks before the quarterly financial audits caught the discrepancy. Elijah let out a dark, humorless laugh that echoed against the glass walls of my office. He thought he could float $1 million embezzlement scheme. He thought he could play God with client money just to impress a woman who spent her days posing with overpriced candles on the internet. He is arrogant, I replied, pulling up the federal sentencing guidelines on my third monitor. And his arrogance just handed us the key to his absolute destruction. This is no longer a simple civil divorce dispute over hidden assets. This is a massive federal crime. Elijah stood up, pacing the length of my office like a caged panther. The legal gears in his head were spinning at maximum velocity. If we take this evidence to family court, a judge will simply freeze the house and slap him with a financial penalty. That is too merciful. We are not doing that. We are going to take this directly to the board of directors at his real estate firm. I smiled, matching his ruthless energy. Carter is walking into a boardroom next week to pitch his $10 million venture capital project, I noted. He thinks he is about to become vice president. He thinks he is untouchable. We are going to let him walk right into that room, Elijah commanded, his eyes burning with absolute retribution. And then we are going to drop this forensic dossier right onto the center of the conference table. We will let his own chief executive officer call the authorities. The door to a federal penitentiary had officially swung wide open. Carter had constructed an elaborate house of cards to fund his illicit fantasy with my sister. He thought he had outsmarted his boring accountant wife. He thought he had outmaneuvered the brilliant lawyer who had married Savannah. Instead, he had willingly locked himself inside a burning building. He had provided the gasoline, the matches, and the financial paper trail. All Elijah and I had to do now was stand back and watch his entire existence turn to ash. The annual Chicago Heritage Foundation Gala was the undisputed crown jewel of the city high society calendar. It was a glittering assembly of generational wealth corporate titans and influential politicians gathered under the massive crystal chandeliers of a historic downtown hotel. I attended representing my forensic accounting firm, wearing a floor-length emerald green gown that was tailored to absolute perfection. I held a flute of vintage champagne, engaging in light strategic networking with a circle of elite banking executives and senior partners from rival law firms. The atmosphere was a symphony of clinking crystal soft jazz and polite laughter. I belonged in this room. I had earned my place through a decade of ruthless intelligence and flawless audits. I commanded respect not through social media followers, but through actual tangible corporate power. Then the heavy mahogany doors of the grand ballroom swung open to admit the night's most audacious guests. Carter and Savannah made their grand entrance. Carter was practically vibrating with unearned arrogance, wearing a velvet tuxedo jacket that he undoubtedly charged to a maxed-out credit card. The stolen platinum Rolex gleamed aggressively on his wrist, catching the light of the chandeliers. He paraded through the ballroom, acting as if he had already secured his vice presidency and closed his $10 million venture capital deal. Savannah clung to his arm like a designer accessory. She had chosen a scandalously tight champagne-colored silk gown specifically designed to highlight the barely visible curve of her stomach. She was weaponizing her supposed pregnancy, using it as a shield and a status symbol. They swept into the room, projecting the sickening illusion of a powerful, triumphant couple who had bravely overcome adversity. They could have stayed on the opposite side of the ballroom. They could have enjoyed the free caviar and mingled with the mid-level real estate brokers hovering near the ice sculptures. But Savannah was a narcissist, fueled by the toxic attention she had recently garnered online. She was drunk on her own fabricated reality. When her eyes locked onto mine across the crowded room, her lips curled into a predatory smirk. She tugged on Carter's arm and steered him directly toward the circle of prominent executives I was currently conversing with. She wanted an audience. She wanted to humiliate me in front of the very people who respected my professional authority. The tension in our immediate vicinity spiked instantly as the surrounding guests recognized the players from Savannah's viral internet spectacle. Savannah stopped right in front of me, resting her hand deliberately on her stomach. Her diamond rings sparkled as she struck a maternal pose. "Oh, Hazel," she sighed, her voice projecting loudly enough to silence the surrounding conversations. "I am so surprised you showed up tonight. I would have thought you would be hiding in your dark little office running numbers and nursing your bruised ego. It takes a lot of nerve to show your face after everyone found out how you treated this poor man." Carter stood beside her, puffing out his chest, looking entirely pleased with his new trophy. He adjusted his stolen watch and shot me a look of pure condescension. I took a slow sip of my champagne, perfectly unfazed by their theatrical display. Savannah leaned in closer, her fake sympathy dripping with absolute venom. "It is a real shame you are so obsessed with your career, Hazel." Savannah mocked, her voice carrying across the quieted circle of executives. "Look at you, 33 years old, entirely alone, and totally barren. You are just a dry, empty tree, incapable of giving a man what he actually needs. You spent your whole life calculating numbers, but you forgot how to be a real woman. It takes a real woman to build a family." I guess Carter finally realized he needed someone who could actually bear fruit. Several executives around us visibly flinched at the sheer cruelty of the insult. To attack a woman over her fertility in a crowded ballroom was an egregious breach of high society etiquette. It was tasteless, classless, and entirely pathetic. Carter smirked boldly, wrapping his arm around Savannah's waist and kissing her temple in a disgusting display of solidarity. They waited for me to shatter. They expected me to throw my champagne in her face, to scream, to cry, or to flee the ballroom in absolute humiliation. They wanted a chaotic public meltdown they could immediately post on social media to further cement my status as an unstable, jealous ex-wife. I did not spill a single drop of my drink. I did not raise my voice a fraction of a decibel. I looked at Savannah with the cold, detached curiosity of a scientist examining a doomed specimen under a microscope. I stepped directly into her personal space, effortlessly dominating the physical dynamic. The air between us turned to solid ice. I leaned in so close that I could smell the expensive designer perfume she had bought using stolen memorial trust funds. I maintained direct, unbroken eye contact, locking her into a gaze that offered absolutely zero mercy. "You should really enjoy the feeling of that expensive silk against your skin tonight, Savannah." I whispered, my voice a lethal, velvet purr meant only for her ears. "You should soak in all this glamorous attention and drink the free champagne while you still can. Because after the federal authorities review the wire fraud and money laundering documents, I just handed over that tight silk dress is going to be confiscated as evidence. The only outfit you will be allowed to wear for the next 10 years is a loose-fitting, neon orange jumpsuit." Savannah's arrogant smirk vanished instantly. All the color drained from her perfectly contoured face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. Her hand dropped limply from her stomach as a violent shudder racked her small frame. She understood the weight of my words. She knew I did not make empty threats. Carter frowned, oblivious to the nuclear bomb I had just detonated in his lover's ear. I pulled back, gave them both a polite, devastatingly calm smile, and seamlessly turned back to the banking executives to finish our conversation regarding corporate tax structures. I left them standing in the middle of the glittering ballroom, paralyzed by the silent, terrifying promise of their impending destruction. The glass and steel monolith of Apex Holdings dominated the Chicago skyline. It was a fortress of institutional wealth where multi-million-dollar transactions were executed before lunch. Carter stepped out of a black town car, staring up at the towering structure with a mixture of absolute desperation and unbridled greed. Today was the pinnacle of his entire professional existence. He was walking into this building to secure a $10 million commercial real estate investment. Closing this specific deal was the only thing keeping him out of a federal penitentiary. He needed the $2 million executive commission to secretly replenish the corporate escrow account he had illegally drained. If he secured the signature today, he could replace the stolen client funds before his firm's quarterly financial audit next week. He would be promoted to vice president, and his financial crimes would remain entirely buried. He did not come to this execution alone. Savannah walked right beside him, her arm looped possessively through his. She had insisted on coming to the corporate headquarters to witness his ultimate moment of glory. She wore a tailored white designer dress paired with a trench coat draped elegantly over her shoulders, playing the role of the supportive, wealthy future wife. She wanted to be in the room when the ink dried on the contract, so she could immediately post a carefully curated photo to her 500,000 followers. She wanted to brag about her brilliant, successful partner, who was providing her with an empire. She was entirely oblivious to the fact that her dream house was currently a crime scene waiting to be raided. They marched through the expansive marble lobby, projecting the illusion of absolute invincibility. Carter adjusted the stolen platinum Rolex on his wrist, using it as a talisman of false confidence. His heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs, but he forced a smooth, arrogant smile onto his face. He had spent the last 72 hours dodging calls from his personal bank, dealing with the frozen accounts I had initiated. He was functionally bankrupt, operating entirely on credit and stolen time. But in his delusional mind, all of that was about to vanish. One signature from the Apex Holdings managing director was all it took to erase his sins. The private elevator shot them up to the penthouse executive level. Carter pulled Savannah close, kissing her forehead. "This is it, baby," he whispered, his voice thick with anticipation. $10 million. Once they sign this paperwork, we are completely untouchable. Hazel can play all the little accounting games she wants with our joint checking accounts. I am about to bring home a $2 million check. We are going to furnish the new mansion and never look back. Savannah smiled brightly, resting her hand on her stomach. "You are so brilliant, Carter," she praised him, feeding his massive ego exactly what it craved. "I cannot wait to see the look on the faces of those executives when you close this deal." The elevator doors slid open, revealing a reception area that screamed absolute corporate dominance. The floors were polished black obsidian, and the walls were lined with modern art that cost more than Carter's entire fake portfolio. A receptionist in a sharp charcoal suit greeted them and immediately escorted them down a long, quiet corridor. Carter walked with his chest puffed out, treating the highly paid corporate staff like common servants. He was already acting like he owned the building. He was completely blind to the fact that Apex Holdings did not hand out $10 million investments without running a microscopic forensic background check on the project manager. They were ushered into the VIP waiting room situated just outside the main executive boardroom. Carter's own chief executive officer and two senior partners from his real estate firm were already sitting there waiting for their golden boy to arrive. They stood up and shook Carter's hand, clapping him on the back. They were banking heavily on this contract. The firm needed this capital injection, and they had put all their faith in Carter's ability to close the negotiation. Carter introduced Savannah to his bosses, presenting her as his soon-to-be wife. The older executives smiled politely, completely unaware that the man shaking their hands had just embezzled $1 million of their own client funds to buy this woman a house. Carter opened his leather briefcase and pulled out the glossy presentation folders. He arranged the contracts, smoothing the heavy paper with trembling fingers. He was sweating under his custom suit jacket. The pressure of the impending audit was a tightening noose around his neck, but he pushed the fear down into the dark corners of his mind. He focused entirely on the prize. He had rehearsed this pitch 100 times. He knew every zoning law, every projected profit margin, and every demographic statistic of the commercial property he was selling. He believed his charisma was completely bulletproof. He believed he could charm a stone into giving him money. The heavy, frosted glass doors of the main boardroom finally swung inward. An executive assistant invited the group to enter. Carter took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and walked into the room like a conquering hero leading his chief executive officer and his pregnant mistress into the arena. The boardroom was massive, featuring a spectacular panoramic view of the Chicago skyline and a dark mahogany conference table that stretched 20 feet across the room. Several high-level directors from Apex Holdings were already seated along the sides of the table, reviewing financial portfolios in absolute silence. Carter directed his bosses to take their seats on the right side of the table, while Savannah took a designated guest chair near the back of the room, crossing her legs and preparing to watch her lover secure their fraudulent future. Carter strode directly to the front of the presentation area. He set his briefcase down and connected his tablet to the massive digital display screen mounted on the wall. He projected a flawless image of confidence ready to deliver the performance of his lifetime. He looked down the length of the long mahogany table toward the head chair. The large leather executive chair at the very head of the table was turned completely around, facing the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The managing director of Apex Holdings, the final decision-maker who controlled the $10 million signature, was already sitting there waiting in silence. Carter smiled, adjusting his tie one last time. He cleared his throat, ready to command the room, ready to secure his $2 million lifeline, and permanently escape the consequences of his spectacular betrayal. He opened his mouth to speak, completely unaware that he had just walked willingly into a flawlessly executed financial slaughterhouse. The heavy leather executive chair at the head of the long mahogany table slowly rotated. The mechanism was completely silent, but the movement commanded the immediate attention of every single person in the room. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a sharp, illuminating glow across my face as I turned to face the presentation area. I sat there wearing a pristine, tailored charcoal suit, my posture immaculate, my hands resting calmly on the polished wood surface before me. Carter froze. The confident, welcoming smile on his face shattered, instantly morphing into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. The laser pointer in his hand trembled. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The air in his lungs seemed to evaporate entirely. From the guest chair at the back of the room, Savannah let out a sharp, audible gasp. Her designer handbag slipped from her grasp and hit the floor with a dull thud. She stared at me as if she were looking at a ghost. The arrogant, triumphant glow she had carried into the building was completely wiped away, replaced by a sickening realization that she had walked directly into a slaughterhouse. Hazel. "What are you doing here?" Carter finally stammered, his voice cracking under the immense pressure. His eyes darted wildly around the room, searching for an explanation, a way out, an escape hatch that simply did not exist. Harrison, the chief executive officer of Carter's real estate firm, frowned in confusion. He looked at Carter and then looked respectfully at me. He adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. "Hazel, it is a pleasure to see you." Harrison greeted me warmly, completely unaware of the domestic battlefield overlapping with his corporate reality. We were informed that Apex Holdings was sending their top external auditor to conduct the final risk assessment, but we did not realize it would be you personally. Carter looked as though he had been physically struck by a freight train. He looked at Harrison and then back at me, his mind violently short-circuiting. He had absolutely no idea. He thought I was just a mid-level number cruncher sitting in a cubicle. He never bothered to understand that I am a senior forensic partner retained by Apex Holdings. Every single multi-million-dollar investment this venture capital fund deploys must pass my desk for a rigorous liability screening. I hold absolute unilateral veto power over this entire $10 million transaction. There is a severe conflict of interest here. Carter panicked, his voice rising in pitch as he desperately tried to salvage his collapsing universe. "Harrison, we cannot do this. She is my wife. We are going through a bitter divorce. She is trying to sabotage this deal out of pure spite. You have to remove her from this boardroom immediately." I did not yell. I did not hurl insults. I did not behave like a scorned woman seeking petty revenge. I operated with the lethal precision of an apex predator. I ignored Carter's pathetic outburst entirely. I kept my eyes locked on his chief executive officer, Harrison. "I am afraid Apex Holdings will be permanently passing on this $10 million investment opportunity," I announced, my voice echoing with chilling professional authority. Furthermore, we are officially blacklisting your real estate firm from any future financial partnerships. Harrison turned pale. The two senior partners sitting next to him shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs. Hazel, please. Harrison urged, a note of genuine panic in his voice. We have met all the financial benchmarks. The zoning permits are secure. Our projected profit margins are fully transparent. If there is a discrepancy in the paperwork, we can resolve it immediately. Please do not kill this deal. There is no discrepancy in the project projections, Harrison replied smoothly. The liability lies entirely with your senior personnel. I picked up the thick, heavy manila folder I had compiled with Elijah the night before. It contained every wire transfer, every offshore routing number, and every piece of damning evidence regarding the stolen client funds. I slid the dossier straight down the center of the long mahogany table. It glided across the polished wood and came to a hard stop directly in front of Harrison. I recommend you open that file, Harrison, I instructed coldly. As a courtesy to a former business partner, I am giving you a brief window to manage a catastrophic internal crisis before the federal authorities raid your headquarters. Harrison opened the folder with shaking hands. The senior partners leaned in closely to inspect the documents. I watched their eyes scan the highlighted bank statements. I watched their professional composure completely disintegrate as they read the routing numbers attached to their own corporate escrow accounts. Your senior project manager bypassed your internal security protocols 72 hours ago, I explained, detailing the crime with surgical accuracy. He accessed your primary commercial holding fund. He initiated an unauthorized wire transfer draining exactly $1 million of protected client deposits. He funneled that stolen capital through a newly registered shell company and commingled it with $150,000 he embezzled from my personal savings account. Carter gripped the edge of the presentation podium, his knuckles turning white. He was hyperventilating, sweating through his custom suit jacket. Savannah was shrinking into the back corner of the room, trying to make herself invisible. "What did you do?" Harrison whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of absolute rage and terror. He looked up from the documents and glared at Carter. "Tell me this is a lie, Carter. Tell me you did not touch the client escrow accounts." Carter could not speak. The evidence was irrefutable. The digital footprint was flawless. He used your stolen corporate funds to purchase a luxury suburban estate outright. I continued, driving the final nail into the coffin. The property deed is fully executed. The mansion is registered entirely under the name of the woman sitting in the back of this boardroom. He orchestrated a massive federal wire fraud scheme to buy a house for his pregnant mistress. The boardroom descended into absolute chaos. The senior partners began shouting, demanding answers. Harrison slammed his fist onto the table, his face turning purple with fury. He realized instantly that his firm was facing a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, a massive public relations disaster, and the potential loss of their operating licenses. Carter had not just ruined his own life, he had jeopardized the entire company. "You are done, Carter," Harrison roared, standing up and pointing a trembling finger at him. "You are completely finished. I am calling the building security to detain you, and then I am calling the police. You are not leaving this room." I sat back in my leather chair, watching the absolute destruction of the man who thought he could discard me like trash. I did not have to raise a hand against him. I had simply handed the truth to the people he had betrayed. The trap had sprung flawlessly, locking him inside a nightmare of his own creation. Harrison slammed his hands on the mahogany table with enough force to rattle the crystal water pitchers. The sound snapped the last thread of Carter's fragile composure. "You are officially terminated," Harrison roared, his voice bouncing off the panoramic windows. "Effective immediately. You are stripped of your title, your equity, and your access to our corporate network. Hand over your company phone and your keycard right this second." Carter fumbled in his pockets, his hands shaking so violently he could barely grip his own device. He tossed the phone onto the table, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. "Harrison, listen to me," Carter pleaded, his voice cracking into a pathetic whine. "I can fix this. I just need a few days. If we can secure a bridge loan, I can replace the escrow funds before the quarterly reporting. Nobody else has to know. Nobody else has to know. Harrison repeated, his face contorting with absolute disgust. You stole $1 million of client money to buy a house for your mistress. You brought a federal crime directly to my doorstep. There is no fixing this, Carter. You are going to prison. The two senior partners sitting next to Harrison were already on their phones, whispering frantic instructions to their legal team to freeze all internal servers. The $10 million deal with Apex Holdings was dead and buried. Carter's grand illusion of becoming vice president had evaporated into thin air. Before the building security could even arrive to escort him out, the heavy frosted glass doors of the boardroom swung open. It was not a receptionist. 4 individuals wearing dark tactical windbreakers stepped into the room. The bold yellow letters on their jackets spelled out FBI. The Economic Crimes Division had arrived. Elijah had been entirely efficient. When a top-tier corporate lawyer hands a federal prosecutor a perfectly packaged forensic dossier, complete with routing numbers, offshore shell companies, and signed property deeds, the justice system moves with terrifying speed. A federal judge had signed the arrest warrant before the sun even rose over Chicago. The lead agent, a tall man with a stern, uncompromising expression, stepped forward and flashed his badge. Carter, you are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement of corporate funds, and money laundering. Put your hands behind your back. The metallic clink of handcuffs being unholstered echoed in the deadly silent boardroom. That sound finally shattered Carter's psychological barrier. The reality of his absolute destruction hit him like a physical blow. His legs gave out beneath him. Carter collapsed onto his knees right there on the expensive boardroom carpet. He ignored the federal agents. He ignored his former bosses. He crawled forward on his knees, turning his desperate, tear-filled eyes toward me. The arrogant man who had thrown divorce papers in my face less than 48 hours ago was now weeping at my feet. Hazel, please. Carter sobbed, the tears streaming down his face, ruining his perfectly styled image. You have to stop this. You know the people at this fund. You can make this go away. Tell them it is a huge misunderstanding. I will give the house back. I will sign whatever you want. Just do not let them take me to jail. I looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no sadness, just the cold satisfaction of a balanced ledger. When my silence offered him no salvation, Carter did exactly what cornered cowards always do. He turned on his accomplice. He frantically pointed his handcuffed hands toward the back of the room where Savannah was still cowering in her white designer dress. It was her, Carter screamed, his voice echoing with desperate betrayal. She made me do it. She told me she was pregnant. She demanded the mansion. She wanted the platinum watches and the luxury lifestyle. She manipulated me, Hazel. She was jealous of your success and she seduced me to get to your money. I never wanted to hurt you. It is all her fault. From the back of the room, Savannah let out a high-pitched shriek of absolute horror. The illusion of their epic romantic love story disintegrated in an instant. The man she had destroyed her marriage for, the man she had paraded around high society, was now selling her out to the federal government without a second thought. Savannah covered her mouth, her eyes wide with the sickening realization that she had tied her fate to a spineless traitor. You lying coward! Savannah shrieked back, her carefully crafted innocent persona completely vanishing. You promised me an empire. You said you were a millionaire. Shut up, Carter yelled back at her, struggling against the grip of the 2 federal agents who were now hauling him to his feet. You ruined my life. I watched the 2 of them tear each other apart. It was a fitting end for a partnership built entirely on theft and deception. They had no loyalty. They had no actual love. They only had their shared greed, and now that the money was gone, they were ready to destroy one another to save themselves. I stood up from my executive chair, smoothing the lapels of my charcoal suit. I picked up my sleek briefcase and opened the brass clasp. I did not pull out a lifeline. I pulled out a single crisp legal document prepared by my own legal counsel. I walked around the mahogany table and stopped right in front of Carter. The federal agents paused, allowing me a final moment with my husband. "You wanted a divorce, Carter," I said, my voice carrying the chill of a Chicago winter. "I am simply expediting your request." I slapped the document directly onto his chest. It was a unilateral divorce petition citing felony convictions, severe financial fraud, and absolute marital abandonment. It stripped him of any right to my assets, my home, or my future earnings. It left him with nothing but his criminal debts and his impending prison sentence. "You can review the terms with your public defender," I stated, looking him dead in the eye. "Assuming they give you reading privileges in federal prison." Carter sobbed, choking on his own panic, as the agents turned him around and marched him forcefully out of the boardroom. I did not watch him leave. I stepped right over the spot where he had been kneeling, adjusted my briefcase, and walked calmly toward the exit, leaving the smoking ruins of his corporate career far behind me. Savannah did not wait to watch the federal agents drag her lover out of the corporate boardroom. The second the handcuffs clicked around Carter's wrists, self-preservation completely overrode any fabricated loyalty she claimed to possess. She grabbed her designer trench coat and sprinted out of the glass doors, her high heels clicking frantically against the polished obsidian floors of the Apex Holdings lobby. She practically shoved a junior analyst out of her way to reach the elevator. She was running purely on adrenaline and absolute panic. She scrambled into the back of a waiting luxury rideshare, her hands shaking so violently she could barely type the destination into her phone. She needed to reach the suburban estate. The mansion was her sanctuary. It was the million-dollar property she firmly believed would elevate her above everyone else in Chicago high society. She calculated her escape plan with the ruthless efficiency of a cornered rat. She just needed to get inside the house, pack her imported leather travel bags with every piece of expensive jewelry, and disappear before the federal authorities started seizing physical assets. She believed her name on the property deed gave her an impenetrable shield. The ride took 45 agonizing minutes. Savannah stared out the tinted window, biting her perfectly manicured nails down to the quick. She bolted out of the vehicle the second it stopped in the sweeping circular driveway of the gated community. She fumbled with the electronic keypad at the front entrance, her breath hitching in her throat, until the heavy oak double doors finally clicked open. The grand foyer was vast and echoing, featuring a sweeping dual staircase and imported Italian marble floors. It was completely empty of furniture, but to Savannah, it represented raw financial equity. She sprinted directly up to the master suite and dragged a massive designer suitcase from the walk-in closet. She began hurling her most expensive possessions inside: the diamond tennis bracelet Elijah had bought her for their anniversary, the limited edition silk scarves, the custom gold watches she had hoarded over the past 2 years. She emptied her jewelry box into the lining of the suitcase, desperate to secure untraceable wealth. As she forcefully zipped the bulging suitcase shut, she heard the distinct sound of heavy boots echoing against the marble floors downstairs. She froze, the blood drained completely from her face. Carter could not possibly be out on bail this fast. She crept to the top of the sweeping staircase and looked down into the grand foyer. Standing in the center of her stolen sanctuary was Elijah. He wore a razor-sharp black suit, his posture rigid and commanding. He did not look like a heartbroken husband, seeking answers. He looked like an executioner, arriving to carry out a final sentence. Flanking him were 3 uniformed officers, including the county sheriff, whose hand rested firmly near his utility belt. Savannah gripped the mahogany banister, her knees buckling beneath her. She tried to deploy her usual defense mechanism. She tried to play the fragile victim. "Elijah," she whimpered, forcing a desperate sob from her throat as she slowly descended the stairs. "Elijah, thank God you are here. Carter forced me into this. He threatened me. He manipulated my anxiety. You have to believe me. I am so scared. I wanted to tell you, but he said he would hurt us." Elijah did not blink. He did not rush forward to hold her. He stood perfectly still, letting her pathetic performance echo in the empty, cavernous room. "Save the community theater audition?" Savannah Elijah stated, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that completely silenced her fake weeping. I have already seen the bank statements. I saw the Memorial Trust Fund withdrawals. I know exactly how you paid for his platinum watch. Savannah froze on the bottom step. The explicit mention of their dead son's memorial fund stripped away her final remaining defense. She could not gaslight her way out of a documented financial atrocity. Elijah reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents bound by a heavy brass clip. He did not hand them to her politely. He threw the heavy packet directly at her chest. The documents hit her and clattered to the marble floor, sliding to a stop against her designer shoes. That is a petition for an at-fault divorce. Elijah declared, his words striking her like physical blows. I am citing egregious marital misconduct, severe financial fraud, and absolute emotional abandonment. I am demanding a highly disproportionate division of assets in my favor based on your documented theft of protected funds. You are getting absolutely zero alimony. You are getting zero equity from my law firm. You are walking away from our marriage with the exact same amount of dignity you showed my son's memory. Nothing. Savannah stared at the legal documents, her mouth hanging open in absolute shock. You cannot do this, she gasped instinctively, clutching her stomach to use her trump card. I am your wife. We share bank accounts. I will hire my own lawyers. You cannot just cut me off and leave me pregnant on the street. I already did, Elijah replied with a cold, emotionless smile. 30 minutes ago, a federal judge signed an emergency injunction. Every single credit card in your wallet is permanently deactivated. Your business accounts for your pathetic candle company are completely frozen pending a forensic audit for wire fraud. Your personal checking account is locked. You do not have the financial liquidity to hire a traffic cop, let alone a divorce attorney capable of fighting my legal team. The county sheriff stepped forward, holding a clipboard with a federal seal. Ma'am, you need to step away from that suitcase, the sheriff ordered, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. This entire property is now an active federal crime scene tied to a major corporate embezzlement investigation. The funds used to purchase this home were stolen. Nothing leaves this house. Savannah's eyes darted wildly between Elijah and the armed officers. The realization of her absolute ruin finally crashed down upon her. She had no money. She had no lawyer. Her lover was in federal custody, and her powerful husband was currently orchestrating her total destruction. She reached out her hands, trembling violently. Elijah. Please, Savannah begged, dropping to her knees on the cold marble floor. I have nothing. How am I supposed to survive? What about the baby? Elijah looked down at her with an expression of pure, unadulterated apathy. You should ask Carter how to survive, he replied, turning his back on her. He is going to have plenty of free time to give you advice through a reinforced glass window. Elijah walked out of the grand double doors, stepping into the crisp Chicago air, leaving Savannah kneeling on the floor, surrounded by armed police officers, completely trapped inside a multi-million-dollar cage she no longer owned. Elijah had his hand resting firmly on the heavy brass handle of the front door when Savannah unleashed a deafening shriek. It was not a cry of sorrow or genuine heartbreak. It was a visceral scream of absolute rage and arrogant entitlement echoing violently against the vaulted ceilings of the grand foyer. She scrambled to her feet, her designer heels slipping dangerously on the polished marble. She lunged toward the doorway, pointing a trembling, frantic finger at the man who had unconditionally funded her entire existence for the past 5 years. You cannot do this to me, Elijah! Savannah screamed, her voice cracking into a hysterical, shrill pitch. You cannot leave a pregnant woman completely destitute on the street. I am carrying a child. I am carrying Carter's baby. The law protects pregnant women. Any judge in this state will grant me emergency spousal support the second I walk into a family courtroom with a visible bump. You owe me a duty of care. You are legally obligated to maintain my standard of living until this baby is born. You will pay my legal fees, and you will pay for my housing because I am carrying an innocent life. She was weaponizing the oldest trick in the manipulative playbook. She thought the mere mention of a pregnancy would instantly paralyze the legal system and force Elijah to open his checkbook. She truly believed the unborn child was her ultimate impenetrable shield, her guaranteed ticket to lifelong financial extortion. Elijah stopped. He did not push the heavy door open. He stood perfectly still, facing the crisp Chicago morning air for a brief moment before turning around very slowly. There was no rage in his dark eyes. There was no residual heartbreak. There was only a cold, terrifying amusement. A dark, hollow smirk crept across his face, transforming him from a stoic corporate attorney into a lethal predator playing with its food. He walked back toward the center of the grand foyer, his expensive leather shoes clicking rhythmically against the stone floor. The three armed police officers stepped back instinctively, giving him a wide berth. Savannah held her ground, jutting her chin forward and resting both hands protectively over her completely flat stomach. She thought she had won. She thought she had finally found his weak spot. "You really should have remembered who you were dealing with, Savannah," Elijah said, his deep baritone voice slicing through the tense air of the mansion. "You spent the last 2 years sleeping with a commercial real estate manager. You forgot that your sister is a senior forensic accountant and your husband is a corporate litigator. When Hazel and I initiated the financial lockdown last night, we did not just audit Carter's bank accounts. We audited his entire existence. We subpoenaed his corporate credit cards, his offshore shell companies, and his premium corporate health insurance billing history." Savannah's arrogant posture faltered slightly. Her hands dropped a fraction of an inch from her stomach. "What does his health insurance have to do with anything?" she demanded, her voice losing its hysterical edge and dropping into a nervous quaver. Elijah reached into the inner breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He did not pull out another legal brief. He pulled out a crisp, sterile-looking white envelope bearing the seal of a major Chicago medical network. He held it up between his fingers, letting the stark white paper catch the morning light streaming through the massive foyer windows. "Hazel is a remarkably thorough investigator." Elijah continued, pacing slowly around Savannah like a shark circling wounded prey. "When she tracks missing assets, she looks at every single outgoing expense. 5 years ago, Carter experienced a severe medical complication, a localized vascular issue that required immediate surgical intervention. The procedure was fully documented, billed directly to his premium healthcare provider, and logged permanently into his medical record." Elijah stopped directly in front of Savannah. He looked down at her with an expression of absolute, unadulterated revulsion. "Carter had a bilateral vasectomy 5 years ago," Savannah Elijah stated, delivering the medical execution with surgical precision. "The procedure was completely successful and entirely irreversible due to the specific nature of the vascular complications. It is biologically impossible for Carter to father a child. He has been entirely sterile for half a decade." The grand foyer fell so silent that you could hear the wind rustling the leaves outside the massive windows. The county sheriff raised an eyebrow, letting out a low, impressed whistle under his breath. Savannah stopped breathing. Her eyes widened to the size of saucers. The color drained from her face so rapidly, she looked as though she might collapse into a pile of dust, right there on the imported Italian marble. "That is a lie," Savannah gasped, taking a stumbling step backward. "You are making this up. You forged those papers to scare me." "I am a corporate lawyer," Savannah Elijah replied, his smirk widening into a terrifying grin. "I do not forge medical documents in front of federal authorities. The certified urology records are right inside this envelope." Hazel pulled the insurance claim data directly from the provider database. "Carter knows he is sterile. He has known for 5 years. He just never bothered to mention it to his mistress because he assumed you were on birth control." Elijah took a step closer, towering over her fragile, shrinking frame. He lowered his voice so that every word struck her like a physical blow. "So that leaves us with two very fascinating legal scenarios," Savannah Elijah whispered, his voice dripping with venom. "Scenario 1, you are completely faking this entire pregnancy. You fabricated a fake baby to manipulate Carter into buying you this multi-million-dollar mansion and to force a rapid divorce from me. You used a non-existent child to secure a real estate transaction, which is a textbook definition of felony wire fraud." Savannah began to shake. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably as the walls of her perfectly constructed lie violently caved in. Or, we can look at scenario 2. Elijah continued mercilessly twisting the knife. You actually are pregnant. But since we possess ironclad medical proof that Carter is entirely sterile, that means you have been sleeping with a third man. You got knocked up by some random guy and decided to pin the paternity on the wealthy real estate manager because you wanted an upgraded lifestyle. You tried to trap a sterile man with another man's baby. Savannah's knees buckled. The absolute devastation of the reveal shattered her central nervous system. She collapsed onto the hard marble floor, her designer coat pooling around her like a discarded rag. She opened her mouth to speak, to formulate a lie, to beg for mercy, but her vocal cords completely failed her. She was entirely speechless. Her ultimate weapon, her golden ticket to lifelong financial security, had just been turned into the exact instrument of her destruction. There will be no emergency spousal support, Elijah declared, tossing the medical envelope onto the floor next to her trembling hands. There will be no sympathy from the family court judge. When I submit this medical dossier into evidence, you will be exposed as a pathological liar, a fraud, and an extortionist. You played a dangerous game of chess with the two smartest people in your life, and you just got checkmated in 4 moves. Elijah turned his back on her for the final time. He did not look back as he walked out the double doors. The sheriff gestured for his deputies to step forward and escort the sobbing, broken woman off the federal crime scene, leaving her with absolutely nothing but the crushing weight of her own spectacular failure. I navigated my sleek black sedan through the wrought iron gates of the exclusive suburban enclave. The morning sun illuminated the manicured lawns and towering oak trees lining the quiet streets. It was a neighborhood built on generational wealth, corporate success, and pristine public images. Carter and Savannah had tried to buy their way into this zip code using stolen money. They had infected this pristine environment with their common greed. I pulled into the sweeping circular driveway, parking directly behind the 3 county sheriff vehicles with their lights silently flashing. I stepped out of my car, the crisp air biting at my tailored charcoal suit. I held a thick blue legal folder in my right hand. It contained a federal asset forfeiture order signed by a district judge just 2 hours ago. I walked up the wide stone steps and crossed the threshold into the grand foyer. The scene inside was a perfect portrait of absolute defeat. Savannah was still crumpled on the imported Italian marble floor, clutching the medical records Elijah had thrown at her. 2 armed deputies stood over her, their expressions devoid of any sympathy. Savannah looked up when my heels clicked against the stone floor. Her expensive mascara was smeared down her cheeks, staining her pale face with dark, ugly streaks. She looked like a feral animal trapped in a snare of her own design. I did not offer her a comforting smile. I did not kneel beside her to wipe her tears. I looked down at her with the exact same cold detachment she had shown me when she announced her affair at my anniversary dinner. I handed the blue folder directly to the commanding sheriff. Here is the expedited federal injunction, I stated, my voice echoing in the cavernous empty house. This document grants immediate authorization to seize this entire property and all physical assets within its perimeters. The capital used to purchase this estate was obtained through a coordinated wire fraud and corporate embezzlement scheme. This house is no longer a private residence. It is an active federal crime scene and a primary asset in an ongoing money laundering investigation. Savannah gasped, scrambling backward on the hard marble floor. You cannot do this, Hazel, she cried, her voice cracking with pure desperation. This is my house. My name is on the deed. Carter bought this for me. You cannot just take it away. Your name is on a fraudulent document purchased with $1 million of stolen client funds and $150,000 of my personal savings, I corrected her, my tone razor sharp. Carter did not buy you an empire, Savannah. He bought you a direct ticket to a federal indictment. Because your name is on that deed, you are now officially listed as a co-conspirator in a major financial crime. The government owns this house now. The government owns the fixtures, the appliances, and the property. And more importantly, the government owns everything you brought inside. Savannah's eyes darted wildly toward the massive designer suitcase she had packed with stolen jewelry and luxury goods. She lunged toward it, her manicured hands grasping desperately at the leather handle. Before she could even pull it an inch, a deputy stepped forward and placed his heavy boot directly on top of the luggage, pinning it to the floor. "Step away from the bag, Mom," the deputy ordered, his hand resting cautiously on his utility belt. As the authorized representative stated, everything on this property is subject to federal seizure. You are not permitted to remove any items. But my jewelry is in there. Savannah shrieked, tears of absolute panic streaming down her face. My clothes, my expensive watches. You cannot leave me with nothing. I need my things. Those are not your things, Savannah, I replied, stepping closer to her trembling form. You bought those luxury goods using the money you stole from Elijah. You drained the memorial trust fund established for your deceased infant son to buy platinum watches and designer silk. Every single item in that suitcase is the product of severe financial fraud. You do not get to walk away with the spoils of your sociopathy. You are leaving this house with absolutely nothing but the clothes you are currently wearing. Savannah sobbed heavily, burying her face in her hands. She thought she had hit absolute rock bottom, but I had one final devastating blow to deliver. I am a forensic accountant, and I do not leave loose ends. I had systematically dismantled her physical wealth, but I also needed to incinerate her digital illusion. While you were busy crying on the floor, I made a highly detailed phone call to the corporate legal department of your favorite social media platform, I announced, watching her head snap up in sheer terror. I provided their fraud division with irrefutable documentation, proving that your lifestyle brand was a front for money laundering. I showed them how you use stolen trust funds to artificially inflate your business metrics and purchase fake engagement. They take financial crimes very seriously, especially when it involves their top creators. Savannah scrambled to pull her smartphone from her trenchcoat pocket. Her hands shook violently as she unlocked the screen and desperately tapped the application icon. She waited for her profile to load. She waited to see her 500,000 followers, her brand deals, and her perfectly curated life. Instead, the screen flashed a stark, aggressive error message. User not found. Account has been permanently suspended for violations of our terms of service regarding fraudulent financial activity. Her entire digital empire had vanished. The 500,000 followers who had attacked me yesterday were gone. Her brand sponsorships were dead. Her carefully constructed public image was completely erased from the internet. She was no longer a wealthy lifestyle influencer. She was just a broke, homeless fraudster sitting on the floor of a confiscated mansion. Savannah let out a hollow, broken wail, clutching the useless piece of glass and metal to her chest. She had nothing left. No rich husband to fund her lifestyle. No stolen mansion to live in. No digital audience to validate her narcissism. She was entirely bankrupt in every conceivable way. The sheriff signaled his deputies. It was time to clear the premises. 2 officers reached down and hauled Savannah to her feet. They did not handle her with care. They treated her like the criminal suspect she was. They guided her firmly toward the grand double doors, giving her no time to beg or plead for mercy. I stood in the center of the majestic foyer, with my hands clasped loosely in front of me. I watched my sister stumble out of the massive front doors wearing a thin designer trench coat and a dress meant to show off a fake pregnancy. She was shoved out into the cold morning air, leaving behind the fake wealth she had tried to build on the ruins of my marriage. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind her with a definitive thud, locking me inside the silent, empty mansion. The surgical strike was complete. I had reclaimed my stolen capital and burned her entirely to the ground. The heavy oak doors of my parents' suburban home had always represented a fortress of conditional love. For 33 years I had walked through that entryway, feeling like an imposter in my own family. Today I did not knock. I used the spare key they had reluctantly given me a decade ago. I walked into their immaculate living room and took a seat on the pristine white leather sofa. I placed a single red folder on the glass coffee table and waited. I did not have to wait long. The front door burst open with a frantic, chaotic energy. William and Barbara stumbled into the foyer looking completely unraveled. The polished country club facade had entirely melted away. My father's golf shirt was stained with sweat, and my mother's perfectly coiffed hair was a disheveled mess. They had just come from the county lockup where Savannah had undoubtedly called them, begging for salvation. They stopped dead in their tracks when they saw me sitting in their living room. For a fraction of a second, relief washed over my mother's face. She actually believed I was there to offer a lifeline. She thought the obedient scapegoat had returned to clean up the mess. "Hazel!" My mother gasped, rushing forward and dropping to her knees right in front of the coffee table. "Thank God you are here. You have to stop this immediately. Savannah just called me sobbing from a police station parking lot. They took her phone. They took the mansion. Carter is in federal custody, and Elijah has filed for divorce. She has absolutely nothing. You have to call the authorities and tell them you made a mistake. Tell them you gave Carter permission to use those funds." I looked down at the woman who had birthed me. She was begging me to commit federal perjury to save the sister who had slept with my husband. The sheer magnitude of her delusion was almost fascinating. "I am not committing a felony to save a thief, Barbara," I replied, my voice completely devoid of any familial warmth. Savannah made her choices. She stole from a dead infant's memorial fund and conspired to launder embezzled money. The federal government does not accept apologies, and I do not issue pardons. William stepped forward, his face twisting into a mask of desperate rage. "You ungrateful wretch," my father shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You orchestrated this entire circus just to punish your sister for finding true love. You knew Carter was transferring that money and you set a trap. You have to drop the civil lawsuit right now, Hazel. If you do not withdraw your claims, the bank is going to freeze Savannah's remaining business assets. If her company goes under, they are going to come after my house." There it was, the ultimate truth laid bare on the expensive Persian rug. William did not care about Savannah's moral corruption. He did not care about my shattered marriage. He only cared about his own financial survival. I took out a second mortgage on this property to keep her lifestyle brand afloat. William continued, his voice cracking with panic. "I leveraged everything we owned to give her a safety net. The bank sent me a notice of default this morning because her corporate accounts were flagged for fraud. If you do not unfreeze her assets and release your claim on that money, the bank will foreclose on this property. You are going to make your own parents homeless. You have to pay off this mortgage, Hazel. You have millions in your corporate accounts. Save this family." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. I looked at the two people who had spent my entire life telling me I was a boring, useless disappointment. They were now begging the boring accountant to save their affluent suburban kingdom. I reached out and placed my hand on the red folder resting on the glass table. "You are a businessman, William," I said, keeping my tone as clinical and detached as a boardroom negotiation. "You understand how commercial debt works. When you took out a high-risk second mortgage to fund a failing internet candle company, you signed a legally binding contract with a massive financial institution. You agreed to strict repayment terms. But Savannah's business has been functionally insolvent for 16 months. You missed 3 consecutive payments. Your loan was classified as a distressed asset." My father's eyes widened. The color rapidly drained from his face as his business acumen finally caught up to his current reality. "When a bank holds a distressed asset, they consider it toxic debt," I explained slowly, ensuring every single word registered in his panicked mind. "Banks do not like holding toxic debt. They prefer to sell it off to private equity firms or specialized asset management companies for pennies on the dollar just to clear their ledgers." Barbara looked frantically between my father and me, completely failing to grasp the financial mechanics of her impending doom. "William, what is she talking about?" my mother cried, grabbing his arm. "Just tell her to write us a check." I opened the red folder and slid a thick stack of notarized legal documents across the glass table. "I did not write you a check, Barbara. I wrote a check to your bank." William stared at the logo printed at the top of the financial transfer documents. His jaw dropped open. His hands began to shake violently as he read the name of the purchasing entity. It was an Independent Asset Management LLC, a company I had quietly registered 5 years ago to handle my own high-yield corporate investments. "I bought your debt, William," I announced, the final checkmate echoing with absolute devastating finality. "When your bank flagged your mortgage as a toxic asset due to Savannah's fraud investigation, my holding company swooped in and purchased the entire loan portfolio. I own your second mortgage. I hold the primary lien on this property." The silence in the living room was absolute. The air grew heavy, crushing the breath out of their lungs. They realized they were no longer looking at their obedient daughter. They were looking at their sole creditor. "You cannot do this," William gasped, his voice reduced to a hollow, terrified whisper. "We are your parents. You cannot buy our debt and throw us out on the street." I stood up from the white leather sofa, towering over them. I buttoned my tailored blazer, projecting the absolute authority of a woman who held their entire existence in the palm of her hand. "I am not your daughter," I stated, my voice striking them like a physical blow. "I am a senior forensic partner and the chief executive of the holding company that currently owns the roof over your head. Because your primary collateral was tied to a federal money laundering suspect, I am officially calling in the debt. You are in severe default. I am initiating the foreclosure process immediately." Barbara let out a gut-wrenching wail, collapsing onto the floor. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably, as the grand illusion of her perfect, wealthy life shattered into a million irreparable pieces. "This house no longer belongs to you, William," I said, looking down at the man who had called me a failure. "It belongs to my asset management firm. You have exactly 30 days to pack your belongings and vacate my property. If you leave so much as a single scratch on the hardwood floors, I will sue you for property damage." I picked up my briefcase, leaving the red folder on the table as a permanent reminder of their absolute destruction. I walked out of the fortress of conditional love, and I did not look back. I turned toward the grand double doors, but William was not finished. The shock of the foreclosure had rapidly mutated into a desperate, toxic rage. He scrambled to his feet, his face twisted in a snarl. "You ungrateful, wretched girl!" He spat, his voice echoing against the vaulted ceiling of the foyer. "After everything we sacrificed to raise you, we gave you a home, we fed you, we provided the foundation for your precious corporate success, and this is how you repay your own flesh and blood. You are a monster, Hazel." "We did our best," Barbara wailed, pulling herself up from the floor and clutching her husband's arm. "We loved you. We always pushed you to excel because we knew you were capable. You are punishing us for simply loving your sister. You are a cold, bitter woman who cares more about money than her own family." I stopped. I did not sigh. I slowly turned back to face them. The air in the room grew entirely still. I walked back to the glass coffee table. I opened my sleek leather briefcase one final time. I reached into a specific zippered compartment and pulled out a single manila envelope. It was not a fresh legal document. It was old. The edges of the paper inside were slightly yellowed, holding the weight of a 15-year-old secret. Sacrifice. I repeated the word, rolling off my tongue like poison. "You want to talk about financial foundations, William? You want to talk about what you provided for me? Let us audit the past." I pulled a faded bank statement from the envelope and dropped it onto the glass table right next to their foreclosure notice. "That is the financial ledger for a custodial college savings account. An account that was established when I was born. By the time I was 18 years old, that account held exactly $85,000. It was money meant to secure my education. Money meant to ensure I started my adult life without the crushing weight of institutional debt." William stared at the faded paper. His angry red face suddenly drained of all color. Barbara took a sharp step backward, her hand flying to cover her mouth. They recognized the document. They thought that specific paper trail had been buried and forgotten a decade and a half ago. I remember sitting at the kitchen table holding my acceptance letter to a top-tier university. I stated, my voice cutting through the silent room with surgical precision. I remember asking you for the login details to my college fund so I could pay my freshman tuition. I remember you looking me dead in the eye and telling me the stock market had crashed. You told me the investments failed. You told me the money was completely gone, and I would have to figure it out on my own. I believed you. I continued taking a slow, deliberate step toward them. I took out predatory student loans. I worked 3 exhausting jobs. I served tables at night. I scrubbed library floors on weekends. I spent my entire 20s buried under a mountain of compound interest while attending intensive accounting classes on 4 hours of sleep. I pulled a second document from the envelope. It was a vehicle registration form dated exactly 1 week after my college fund was emptied. I threw it onto the table. You did not lose my money in the stock market, William. You withdrew every single cent of my $85,000 and walked straight into a luxury car dealership. You bought Savannah a brand new Porsche convertible as a high school graduation present. You stole my education to buy your golden child a sports car. The absolute truth hung in the air, undeniable and devastating. They had literally cannibalized my future to fund Savannah's superficial teenage vanity. They had watched me struggle and suffer while maintaining the illusion of wealthy, generous parents. You watched me starve, I said, my tone dropping to a dangerous, lethal whisper. You watched me drown in debt for 10 years. You watched me sacrifice my youth to pay off loans for an education you originally had the money to cover. You sat at country club dinners bragging about my accounting degree while knowing you had stolen the very funds meant to pay for it. You allowed me to believe I was a financial burden while Savannah drove around the suburbs in a vehicle purchased with my stolen future. Barbara began to hyperventilate, shaking her head in a pathetic attempt to deny reality. Hazel, please, we intended to pay it back. We just wanted Savannah to fit in with her friends. She was so popular and she needed a reliable vehicle. We were going to take out a loan to replace your college fund, but the business slowed down. We never meant to hurt you. I ignored her pathetic excuses. The forensic evidence did not care about her intentions. The numbers told a story of absolute calculated betrayal. You are not my parents, I declared, stripping them of the only title they had left to hide behind. You are financial parasites. You are thieves who exploited one child to finance the delusion of another. You traded my stability for a shiny hood ornament. From this exact second forward, you are nothing to me but evicted tenants. I reached into my briefcase one last time and withdrew a thick legal packet bound with a blue ribbon. I shoved it directly into William's chest, forcing him to take it. His hands trembled as he gripped the heavy stack of paper. This is not a suggestion, I commanded, projecting the absolute authority of a woman who held total control over their destiny. This is a court-ordered restraining order, signed by a superior court judge this morning. It legally prohibits you, Savannah and Carter, from coming within 500 feet of my person, my residence, or my corporate office. It covers all forms of digital and physical communication. If you attempt to call me, email me, or approach me in public, you will be immediately arrested and jailed for violating a federal mandate. William looked down at the restraining order, entirely broken. He had no more arguments. He had no more leverage. The arrogant patriarch had been systematically dismantled and exposed as a petty thief. You have exactly 30 days to pack your miserable lives into cardboard boxes and vacate my property, I stated, turning my back on them for the absolute final time. Do not leave a single piece of trash behind. I will be sending a professional inspection team on day 31 to assess the property for damages. If anything is missing, I will garnish whatever meager wages you manage to secure in your disgraced retirement. I walked out of the house, the heavy oak doors closing behind me with a resonant, definitive thud. I left them standing in the ruins of their own greed, entirely bankrupt, both financially and morally. They had built their entire kingdom on lies and stolen capital. Now they had 30 days to watch that kingdom crumble into dust before they were cast out into the cold reality of the world they had tried so hard to avoid. I walked down the driveway toward my waiting vehicle, breathing in the crisp air of absolute, total vindication. 30 days had passed since the heavy oak doors of my former parents' house slammed shut behind me. 30 days of absolute silence enforced by federal mandates and court-ordered restraining orders. The dust had finally settled over the scorched earth of my previous life, leaving behind a landscape of perfect clarity. Justice in the corporate world does not operate on a moral timeline, but when backed by forensic accounting and a top-tier legal strategist, it moves with devastating velocity. Carter was currently residing in a maximum security federal detention center in downtown Chicago, awaiting his formal trial. The man who had proudly worn custom-tailored Navy suits and stolen platinum watches was now assigned a standard-issue neon orange jumpsuit. His arrogant requests for bail had been swiftly and mercilessly denied by a federal judge who deemed him an extreme flight risk after reviewing the offshore shell companies he had attempted to establish. There were no luxury real estate deals to be made inside a concrete cell measuring 8 by 10 feet. There were no Michelin-starred dinners or venture capital executives to charm. He was completely isolated, facing up to 20 years in federal prison for corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and severe money laundering. His public defender had already advised him to take a plea deal, but the crushing reality of his total destruction had left him entirely catatonic. The golden boy of commercial real estate was now just another inmate number logged into a government database. Savannah experienced an even more dramatic fall from her manufactured grace. With her bank accounts frozen, her physical assets seized by federal authorities, and her social media empire permanently deleted, she had absolutely no safety net left to catch her. The woman who once spent her days curating aesthetic lifestyle content and posing in expensive silk dresses was now wearing an itchy polyester uniform. I had run a routine background check just out of professional curiosity to close the file. Savannah was currently employed as a cashier at a discount supermarket in the far western suburbs. She spent her days standing under harsh fluorescent lights, scanning barcode labels and bagging cheap groceries for minimum wage. Her designer manicures were ruined. There was no fake pregnancy to protect her from the grueling reality of manual labor. There was no wealthy lawyer husband to fund her delusions of grandeur. She was entirely invisible, reduced to the exact mediocre reality she had always believed she was too good for. William and Barbara met a similarly poetic and utterly pathetic end. True to my word, my asset management firm sent a professional eviction team on day 31. They were escorted off the premises by armed security, and the locks were changed immediately. Stripped of their elite country club memberships and completely shunned by their wealthy suburban friends, they had been forced to relocate to a cramped, drafty rental apartment in a decaying neighborhood. The grand illusion of their superiority had been shattered, exposing them to the world as the financial parasites they truly were. I heard through the legal grapevine that they spent their days in that tiny apartment bitterly blaming each other for their downfall. They had traded their dignity and their daughter's future for a sports car 15 years ago, and now they were paying the ultimate compound interest. They had absolutely nothing left but each other and the suffocating, deafening silence of their ruined reputation. High above the consequences of their actions, I sat in a secluded VIP booth at an exclusive rooftop restaurant overlooking the glittering Chicago skyline. The night air was crisp, but the ambient heaters cast a warm, comfortable glow over the polished glass table. I wore a sharp, tailored emerald blazer, my posture relaxed and commanding. Elijah sat across from me holding a crystal glass of vintage reserve red wine. He looked immaculate in a dark charcoal suit, his presence radiating calm, focused power. There was no lingering heartbreak in his dark eyes. He had legally severed Savannah from his life with brutal efficiency, securing an at-fault divorce that left her with absolutely zero claim to his corporate wealth or his future earnings. He had protected his assets and avenged the memory of his infant son with surgical precision. We raised our crystal glasses under the soft ambient light. We did not offer a sentimental toast. There were no cheesy romantic declarations or dramatic speeches about emotional healing. We were two highly rational apex predators who had successfully neutralized a localized threat. We had identified a malignant tumor in our respective lives, and we had excised it completely, leaving clean, healthy margins. The heavy crystal chimed with a clear, resonant note. We took a slow, measured sip of the expensive wine. Elijah set his glass down and extended his hand across the table. I met his grip firmly. It was the solid, respectful handshake of two elite professionals closing the most important merger of their lives. The merger of absolute independence and mutual respect. I turned my gaze toward the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the sprawling electric grid of the city. Millions of lights sparkled in the dark night, representing endless corporate networks, financial systems, and untapped opportunities. I was no longer a boring accountant pushing papers in the background. I was no longer the scapegoat of a toxic family or the discarded wife of a narcissistic fraud. I was the chief architect of my own empire. I took a deep breath of the crisp, high-altitude air, feeling a profound, unshakable peace settle into my bones. The weak had been purged. The traitors had been locked away in their respective prisons. I smiled a genuine, triumphant smile into the reflection of the glass, stepping boldly into a brand new era of absolute freedom and unlimited power. The story of Hazel teaches us a profound and uncompromising lesson about human nature and personal boundaries. Blood relations do not automatically make someone family, and a shared history does not entitle anyone to your future or your hard-earned success. For years, toxic environments condition us to accept far less than we actually deserve. Toxic families will label quiet competence as boring while constantly rewarding loud, arrogant narcissism. But the absolute truth is that the people who consistently belittle your achievements are usually the very same people secretly relying on your financial and emotional stability. When you finally stop fighting for their conditional approval and start building your own independent foundation, you completely strip away their only weapon against you. Financial literacy, emotional intelligence, and professional independence are your greatest shields against manipulation. When severe betrayal strikes, your natural human instinct is to scream, cry, and demand answers from people who are entirely incapable of basic honesty. However, this story proves that the most devastating response to betrayal is absolute calculating silence. You should never waste your energy arguing with pathological liars or narcissists. Instead, let them confidently construct their fragile houses of cards, while you quietly and methodically gather the concrete evidence required to burn their illusions to the ground. True justice is never about petty emotional revenge. It is about establishing impenetrable boundaries, protecting your assets, and allowing toxic individuals to suffer the full crushing weight of their own terrible decisions. You alone hold the pen to your life story, so you must stop setting yourself on fire just to keep ungrateful people warm. If you have ever had to walk away from a toxic environment to build your own independent empire, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share your own story of absolute triumph in the comments below.